The Game of Money, The Rules No One Teaches You About Building Wealth, published by 1% Audiobook. Introduction. Money is not just earned, it is played like a game, and the few who understand its rules seem to move ahead while everyone else keeps running in circles. You may have worked hard, saved when you could, and done what you were told was right, yet something still feels missing. The truth is simple but rarely spoken. Effort alone does not win this game, understanding does. From a young age, you were taught how to earn, but not how to build. You were shown how to survive, but not how to grow. And so, without realizing it, you stepped onto the field of money without a clear strategy, reacting instead of directing, hoping instead of knowing. Meanwhile, those who studied the game quietly followed a different path, one guided by principles that are rarely explained, yet consistently practiced. Long it is about seeing money differently. It is about recognizing patterns, understanding decisions, and learning how small actions, repeated over time, create powerful outcomes. Once you begin to see money as a system, something that can be learned, shaped, and controlled, you shift from being a participant to becoming a player. In this audiobook, we will uncover the hidden rules that govern how money moves, grows, and multiplies. You will learn how to take control of your financial direction, avoid the traps that keep people stuck, and build a foundation that lasts. Each chapter will guide you step by step, not just to understand money, but to use it with clarity and intention. This is not about where you start. It is about how you choose to play from this moment forward. The rules are already there. Now, it is time to learn them and use them. Let's begin. Chapter 1, Wake Up to the Money Game. Money has rules. Whether you see them or not, and the moment you begin to see them clearly, everything starts to change. Up until now, you may have treated money as something that comes and goes, something you earn, spend, and worry about. But what if I told you that? Money behaves more like a game, structured, predictable, and deeply influenced by how you choose to play it. The problem is not that the game is unfair. The problem is that most people never realize they are playing. Think about it for a moment. Everyday decisions are being made: what to spend, what to save, what to ignore, what to chase. These decisions may feel small, almost invisible, but together they create a pattern, and that pattern determines your financial direction. Not luck, not chance, patterns. The people who win financially are not necessarily smarter or more talented, they're simply more aware. They see the game for what it is, and because they see it, they can play it differently. Now, imagine two individuals earning the same income. One spends without thinking, upgrades their lifestyle every time their income increases, and believes that earning more will eventually solve everything. The other pauses, observes, and asks a different question: what is money doing in my life? That second person begins to notice where money flows, where it leaks, and where it could grow. Over time, their paths separate, not because of income, but because of awareness. One reacts, the other plays. This is where the shift begins. Waking up to the money game is not about sudden change, it is about seeing clearly. It is about stepping back and realizing that every financial move you make is either moving you forward or holding you in place. There is no neutral. Even doing nothing is a move. Even ignoring your finances is a decision. And once you understand that, you begin to take responsibility, not in a heavy, overwhelming way, but in a powerful, freeing way. You see, when you're unaware, money controls you. It pushes you into decisions, into stress, into habits that feel automatic. But when you become aware, even slightly, something shifts. You pause before spending, you question before committing, you begin to notice patterns that were invisible before. And that awareness, simple as it sounds, is the first real advantage in this game. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine someone who receives their salary and immediately starts spending bills, food, small pleasures, and then a few impulsive purchases. At the end of the month, they are left wondering where it all went. Now, compare that with someone who receives the same salary, but takes 10 minutes to plan, just 10 minutes. They decide in advance what portion will be saved, what will be invested, and what will be spent. The difference is not effort. The difference is intention. One is drifting, the other is directing. And here is the truth that most people overlook. Money rewards direction, it flows toward clarity. When you know what you are doing with your money, even in small ways, you begin to create momentum. Small decisions become consistent habits become powerful results. It does not happen overnight, and it is not meant to. The game of money is not about speed, it is about direction. So, waking up means asking better questions. Not how much do I make, but what am I doing with what I make? Not why is money always short, but where is it going? These questions may feel simple, but they open the door to awareness, and awareness leads to control. At this stage, you do not need perfection. You do not need complex strategies or advanced knowledge. What you need is clarity. You need to see your financial life as it truly is, without excuses, without assumptions. Because once you see clearly, you cannot unsee. And once you cannot unsee, you begin to act differently. This is the first step in. The game. Not earning more, not investing faster, simply waking up. Because when you wake up, you stop playing blindly. And when you stop playing blindly, you give yourself a chance to finally win. Chapter 2, stop trading time for income. Time is the most limited resource you have, yet most people spend their entire lives exchanging it for money without ever questioning the deal. From the moment you enter the working world, the pattern is set. Show up, give your hours, receive your pay. It feels normal, it feels secure, it feels like the only way. But if you look closely, you'll begin to see the hidden cost. Every hour you trade is an hour you can never get back. And when your income depends entirely on your time, your earning potential is automatically limited by the number of hours in a day. This is not about rejecting hard work. Hard work has its place. It builds discipline, it builds character, and it can open doors. But hard work alone does not create wealth. If it did, the hardest working people would always be the wealthiest, yet that is rarely the case. The real difference lies in how money is earned. There are those who rely only on their time, and there are those who build systems that continue to produce income even when they are not actively working. That difference changes everything. Think about someone who works 10 hours a day at a job. Their income grows only when they work more hours or receive a raise. Now, imagine another person who spends time building something, an asset, a skill, or a system that continues to generate income after the initial effort is made. At first, it may take more thought, more patience, and even more effort, but over time, that effort begins to multiply. The first person is always starting over each day. The second person builds on yesterday's progress. One is stuck in a cycle, the other is creating momentum. This is the shift you must begin to understand. Time for money is active income. It requires your constant presence. The moment you stop, the income stops. There is nothing wrong with earning this way in the beginning. In fact, most people start here. But the mistake is staying here without a plan to move beyond it. Because if your entire financial life depends on your time, you will always feel the pressure of needing to work, needing to show up, needing to keep going, just to maintain your current position. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine two friends starting their careers at the same time. Both earn similar salaries. One spends everything they make and focuses only on their job. The other sets aside a portion of their income and begins to explore ways to make that money work. Maybe through small investments, maybe by building a side income, maybe by learning a skill that can be scaled. At first, there is no visible difference. Months pass, even a year or two. But slowly, the gap begins to appear. One is still dependent on their job. The other is creating options. Options are what change the game. When you are no longer fully dependent on your time, you gain freedom, not just financially, but mentally. You begin to make decisions differently. You are not forced into every opportunity. You are not pressured by every expense. You have space to think, to plan, to grow, and that space is incredibly powerful. Now, this does not mean you suddenly stop working or abandon your current income. That would be unrealistic and unnecessary. Instead, it means you start thinking differently about how your time is used. You begin to ask, is this effort creating something that will last, or is it something I must repeat again tomorrow? That question alone can change your direction, because once you become aware of how your time is being exchanged, you can start to redirect a portion of it toward building something more sustainable. This is where leverage comes in. Leverage simply means using your time, money, or skills in a way that produces greater results than your direct effort alone. It could be as simple as investing money that grows over time. It could be building something once and benefiting from it repeatedly. It could be learning a skill that allows you to earn beyond hourly limits. The form does not matter as much as the principle. Your effort should not always be one-to-one with your income. At first, this may feel slow. You may not see immediate results. That is normal. The early stages of building leverage often feel invisible, but this is where patience matters. Because while others continue trading time for income without change, you are quietly building something that has the
potential to grow beyond your daily effort. And here is the key idea to remember: the goal is not to stop working. The goal is to stop depending only on your time. The goal is that there is a difference. One keeps you trapped, the other sets you free. So start small, start where you are, begin to notice how your time is being used. Begin to question whether your effort is creating something that lasts. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need awareness and a willingness to think differently. Because once you break the pattern of trading time for income, even slightly, you begin to step into a new level of the game. One where your money can grow without requiring every hour of your life. Chapter 3, take control of every dollar. Money rarely disappears all at once. It slips away quietly in small decisions that feel harmless in the moment. A purchase here, a habit there, a little upgrade, a small indulgence. Nothing that seems significant on its own. But over time, these small choices form a pattern, and that pattern determines whether your money serves you or controls you. The truth is simple. If you are not directing your money, it is being directed for you. Control does not mean restriction. It does not mean removing every enjoyment or living with constant pressure. Real control is awareness. It is knowing where your money is going, why it is going there, and what it is doing for your future. Without that awareness, even a high income can feel like it is never enough. With it, even a modest income can begin to create stability and progress. Consider how most people handle their money. Income comes in, and almost immediately it starts going out. Bills are paid, necessities are covered, and whatever remains is spent without much thought. At the end of the month, there is often a question: where did it all go? That question is a sign of lost control. Not because the person is careless, but because they are operating without a clear system. Money is being used but not managed. Now, imagine a different approach. Before any spending begins, there is a pause, a simple moment of clarity. Decisions are made intentionally. This portion is for essential expenses. This portion is for future growth. And this portion is for personal enjoyment. Nothing complicated, just clear direction. The same income, the same life, but a completely different result over time. One approach reacts, the other leads. Taking control begins with a shift in mindset. Instead of seeing money as something to spend, you begin to see it as something to direct. Every dollar has a purpose.
Every decision has a consequence. And when you start to think this way, your behavior changes naturally. You don't need to force discipline, it grows out of awareness. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine someone who earns a steady income, but never tracks their spending. They feel comfortable most of the time, but they are also often surprised by sudden shortages. Now, compare that with someone who takes just a few minutes each week to review their finances. They notice patterns, subscriptions they don't use, habits that add up, areas where money could be redirected. Over time, they make small adjustments. Nothing extreme, but those small adjustments begin to free up money that was previously unnoticed. That is control in action. And here is something important to understand. Money follows attention. Where your attention goes, your money tends to follow. If you ignore it, it drifts. If you focus on it, it responds. This is why even simple practices like reviewing your expenses or planning ahead can have a powerful effect. Not because they are complex, but because they create awareness, and awareness leads to better decisions. Another trap to watch for is lifestyle inflation. As income increases, spending often rises just as quickly. A better income leads to a better lifestyle, which then becomes the new normal. There is nothing wrong with improving your life. The problem is when every increase in income is matched by an increase in expenses. In that situation, progress becomes invisible. You earn more, but you do not move forward. Taking control means breaking that pattern. It means deciding in advance how increases in income will be used. A portion can improve your lifestyle, yes, but another portion should strengthen your future. This is how control turns into growth, not through restriction, but through intentional balance. You also begin to notice something else when you take control. Your relationship with money changes. You feel less stress, not because you have more money, but because you understand it better. You stop reacting emotionally to every expense. You stop feeling uncertain about your financial position. Instead, you gain clarity, and clarity brings confidence. Now, this does not require perfection. You will still make mistakes. You will still have moments where money slips through unnoticed. That is part of the process. The goal is not to control every detail perfectly. The goal is to stay aware, to keep adjusting, and to remain intentional. Think of it this way: every dollar is a choice. It can be spent, saved, or invested. It can move you forward, or it can keep you in place. When you begin to see money as a series of choices, rather than a constant flow, you take back your power. You are no longer reacting to money, you are directing it. And that is where real change begins. Not with more income, not with complicated strategies, but with control. Because when you take control of every dollar, you are not just managing money, you are shaping your future, one decision at a time. Chapter 4, pay yourself first every single time. There is a simple rule that separates those who stay financially stuck from those who steadily move forward, and it is this: you must pay yourself first. Not what is left over, not what feels convenient. First, before the bills, before the spending, before the small rewards that feel justified after a long day. Because if you wait until the end, there is almost always nothing left. And if there is nothing left, there is no progress. Most people reverse this rule without realizing. Income comes in, and immediately it is distributed outward. Rent, food, obligations, small. Comforts? Everything gets paid, and then whatever remains, if anything, is considered savings. This approach feels natural, even responsible, but it quietly keeps you in place. You are taking care of everything and everyone else before taking care of your own future. And over time, that habit becomes a pattern that is very difficult to break. Paying yourself first changes that pattern. It is not about saving large amounts or making drastic sacrifices. It is about priority. It is about making a clear decision that your future matters just as much as your present. When income arrives, the first action is to set aside a portion for yourself. Money that is not meant to be spent, but to grow. This single shift, repeated consistently, begins to create a foundation. Let me give you a simple picture. Imagine two people earning the same income. One spends first and saves what remains. The other saves first and spends what remains. At the beginning, the difference may seem small, almost insignificant. But over time, that difference grows. The first person continues to rely on what they earn each month. The second person begins to build something beyond their monthly income. One is maintaining, the other is progressing. Now, you might be thinking, what if there isn't enough to set aside? That is a common concern, but here is the key. It is not about the amount. It is about the habit. Even a small percentage, something that feels manageable, can begin the process. The goal is not to create pressure, but to create consistency. Because once the habit is established, it becomes easier to increase over time. There is also something psychological that happens when you pay yourself first. You begin to see yourself differently. You are no longer someone who spends and hopes to save. You become someone who builds, who plans, who takes ownership of their future. That identity shift is powerful. It influences your decisions, your priorities, and your long-term thinking. One of the easiest ways to apply this rule is through automation. When the process is automatic, it removes the need for constant decision-making. A portion of your income is set aside the moment it arrives without relying on willpower. This creates consistency without friction, and consistency, more than anything else, is what builds results over time. Think about how small, regular actions shape your life. A daily habit, repeated over months and years, becomes something much larger than it first appears. The same is true with money. A small amount, set aside regularly, begins to grow, not just because of the amount itself, but because of what it represents: discipline, patience, and long-term thinking. Another important point to understand is that paying yourself first is not the same as simply saving money. Saving is the starting point, but the real goal is to build something that grows. The money you set aside should eventually be directed toward opportunities that can increase its value. But before you can grow it, you must first create it, and that begins with this rule. There will be moments when it feels difficult, unexpected expenses, temporary challenges, or even the temptation to skip just this once. But this is where the phrase becomes important. Every single time. Not when it is easy, not when it is convenient, every time. Because consistency builds trust with yourself. And once you trust your own financial habits, everything becomes more stable. Let's return to the idea of direction. In the previous chapter, you began to take control of your money. Now, you are giving it a clear purpose. You are telling your money where to go or anything else plans to. And in doing so, you are slowly, but steadily, building a system that works for you. This is not about perfection. It is about commitment. It is about making one decision and repeating it until it becomes part of who you are.
Because over time, what once felt small becomes significant. What once felt difficult becomes natural. And one day, you will look back and realize that this simple rule, paying yourself first, was not just a financial habit. It was the moment you stopped living month to month and started building something that could last. Chapter 5. Stop buying liabilities, start owning assets. One of the most important shifts you can make in your financial life is learning the difference between what builds your future and what quietly drains it. The words are simple, assets and liabilities, but the impact of understanding them is powerful, because once you see the difference clearly, your decisions begin to change, often without force. You start to recognize that not everything you own is helping you move forward. In fact, some of the things you are most proud of may be holding you back. An asset is something that puts money into your life. A liability is something that takes money out. That's it. No complicated definitions, no technical language, just a simple question. Does this bring money in or does it take money out? And yet, despite how simple this sounds, many people confuse the two. They buy things that look valuable, feel important, and appear successful. But financially, those things do the opposite of what they expect. Think about a common situation. Someone earns more money, and as a result, they upgrade their lifestyle. A better phone, a bigger house, a more expensive car. These things may improve comfort and appearance, but they also come with ongoing costs, maintenance, payments, upgrades, and attention. Over time, these costs grow. And suddenly, despite earning more, the person feels just as financially restricted as before. The income increased, but so did the outflow. The appearance of success replaced the substance of it. Now, compare that with someone who makes a different choice. Instead of focusing only on what they can buy, they begin to think about what they can own that produces value. They look for opportunities that generate income, even in small amounts at first. It could be an investment, a side project, or something that creates ongoing returns. The key is not the size, it is the direction. They are building assets, not just collecting possessions. This is where many people get stuck. Liabilities are often easier to buy. They are visible, immediate, and emotionally satisfying. Assets, on the other hand, often require patience. They may not look impressive at the beginning. They may not provide instant reward. But over time, they begin to grow, and more importantly, they begin to support you instead of relying on you. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine two individuals with similar incomes. One spends a large portion of their earnings on things that require ongoing payment. The other sets aside money to acquire something that generates income, even if it is small at first. In the early stages, there is little visible difference. In fact, the first person may appear more successful. But as time passes, the second person's assets begin to grow. Income starts coming in from multiple directions. The gap widens, not because of effort alone, but because of decisions. This is the essence of wealth building. It is not about how much you earn. It is about what you keep and how you use it. When you consistently choose assets over liabilities, you begin to create a system where your money works for you. Instead of constantly supporting your lifestyle, your money begins to support itself, and eventually, it begins to support you. Now, this does not mean you must avoid every liability. Life is meant to be lived, and comfort has its place. The key is balance and awareness. The problem arises when liabilities dominate your financial life, leaving little room for growth. When most of your income is committed to maintaining your lifestyle, you have very little flexibility. And without flexibility, progress becomes difficult. So the question becomes simple. Before you make a financial decision, ask yourself, is this helping me build or is this just costing me? That question alone can change your behavior. It creates a pause. It brings awareness into the moment, and often that awareness is enough to shift your choice. Another important point to understand is that assets tend to grow quietly. They do not always demand attention. They do not always provide immediate satisfaction, but they compound. They build on themselves, and over time, they create something much larger than their starting point. Liabilities, on the other hand, often do the opposite. They require attention. They require maintenance. They slowly pull resources away. This chapter is not about avoiding purchases. It is about making intentional ones. It is about understanding that every financial decision either builds your future or delays it. And once you begin to see that clearly, your priorities begin to shift. You start to feel less driven by impulse and more guided by purpose. You begin to value what grows over what shines. And slowly, without dramatic changes, your financial life begins to transform. Because in the game of money, the goal is not to own more things. The goal is to own more of what works for you. Chapter 6. Start small, let time build wealth. Big results rarely begin with big actions. They begin with small decisions, repeated consistently, often unnoticed in the beginning. This is one of the most overlooked truths in the game of money. People wait. They wait until they earn more, until they feel ready, until the amount feels worth it. And in that waiting, they lose something far more valuable than money. They lose time. Because time, when combined with consistency, has a way of turning small beginnings into powerful outcomes. There is a common belief that you need a large amount of money to start building wealth. That belief feels logical, but it quietly keeps people stuck. It creates hesitation. It delays action. And the longer the delay, the harder it becomes to begin. The truth is, the amount matters far less than the habit. What matters is starting. Because once you start, you create movement. And movement, even if small, leads to progress. Imagine two people. One decides to wait until they can set aside a large amount before they begin. The other starts immediately, even with a small portion. At first, the difference is almost invisible. The small amount doesn't feel significant. It doesn't create excitement. It doesn't seem like it will change anything. But time begins to work in the background, quietly, consistently. And over months and years, that small start begins to grow. This is the power of compounding. It is not dramatic. It is not fast. But it is incredibly effective. Money that is set aside and allowed to grow begins to generate its own momentum. What started as a small effort begins to expand, not because of sudden change, but because of steady accumulation. And the earlier you begin, the more time you give that process to work. Now here is where most people make a mistake. They focus on intensity instead of consistency. They try to do too much at once, and when it feels difficult, they stop. But wealth is not built through short bursts of effort. It is built through steady, repeatable actions. A small amount set aside regularly is far more powerful than a large amount saved once and then forgotten. Think of it like this. A single drop of water does not seem like much, but over time, repeated drops can shape stones. The same principle applies to money. Each small action adds up. Each decision builds on the last. And over time, what once felt insignificant becomes meaningful. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine someone who decides to set aside a small portion of their income every month. It may not feel like much at first. In fact, they may even question whether it is worth the effort, but they continue month after month, year after year. Slowly, that small amount begins to grow. Opportunities appear. Confidence increases. And what started as a simple habit becomes a foundation. Now, compare that with someone who keeps waiting for the right time. They plan. They think. They consider. But they do not act. Years pass. Opportunities come and go. And eventually they realize that the perfect moment never arrived. Because the perfect moment is not something you wait for. It is something you create by starting where you are. Another important idea to understand is that starting small removes pressure. When the amount is manageable, it becomes easier to stay consistent. You are not forcing yourself into discomfort. You are building a habit that fits into your life. And as your confidence grows, you can gradually increase your effort. But the foundation remains the same. Start small, stay consistent, and let time do its work. This approach also changes how you see progress. Instead of looking for immediate results, you begin to appreciate steady growth. You become patient. You understand that real change takes time, and that patience protects you from making impulsive decisions that can set you back. There will be moments when it feels slow, moments when it seems like nothing is happening. But this is where trust becomes important. Trust in the process. Trust in the habit. Because even when you do not see immediate results, progress is still being made beneath the surface. And here is the truth that many people discover. Too late. Time rewards those who start early and stay consistent. It does not reward those who wait. It does not reward those who hesitate. It rewards action even if that action is small. So do not underestimate the power of a small beginning. Do not dismiss a small step as meaningless. Because in the game of money, small steps taken consistently lead to large outcomes. You do not need to have everything figured out. You do not need a perfect plan. You only need to begin. And once you begin, time becomes your partner instead of your enemy. Chapter 7. Build multiple streams of income. Relying on a single source of income may feel stable, but in reality, it creates a quiet form of risk. When all your financial security depends on one stream, any disruption, expected or unexpected, can affect everything at once. This is not about fear. It is about awareness. Because once you understand this, you begin to see why building multiple streams of income is not just a strategy for growth, but a foundation for stability. Most people start with one primary source of income, usually their job, and there is nothing wrong with that. It provides structure, it
experience, and a steady flow of money. But the mistake is assuming that one source is enough for the long term. Because over time, expenses grow, responsibilities increase, and life becomes less predictable. And when there is only one source supporting everything, the pressure begins to build. Now imagine a different approach. Instead of relying on one stream, you begin to develop additional sources of income, even if they start small. At first, it may feel unnecessary. You already have income. Why create more? But this is where the mindset shift happens. You are no longer thinking only about earning. You are thinking about building. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine two individuals with similar jobs and incomes. One depends entirely on their salary. The other uses a portion of their time and resources to create an additional income stream. It could be something small, a side activity, an investment, or a skill that generates extra income. At the beginning, the difference is minimal. But over time, that second stream begins to grow. And eventually, it becomes something more than just extra money. It becomes an option. Options change everything. When you have multiple sources of income, you are no longer fully dependent on one. You gain flexibility. You gain confidence. You gain the ability to make decisions without constant pressure. And that freedom, even in small amounts, begins to shift how you approach money. Now it is important to understand that building multiple income streams does not happen overnight. It requires patience. It requires consistency. And most importantly, it requires a willingness to start small. Many people make the mistake of trying to create something large immediately. They overcomplicate the process, become overwhelmed, and eventually stop. But just like in the previous chapter, the key is to begin with what is manageable. There are different types of income, and understanding them can help you think more clearly. Active income is what you earn through direct effort, your time, your work, your presence. Passive or leveraged income, on the other hand, continues to generate money even after the initial effort is made. The goal is not to eliminate active income, but to gradually increase the portion of your income that does not depend entirely on your time. This could take many forms. It could be investing money that grows over time. It could be creating something that continues to produce value. It could be developing a skill that allows you to earn beyond traditional limits. The exact path will vary, but the principle remains the same. Your income should not be limited to a single source. Another important idea to keep in mind is that each income stream does not need to be large. Even small streams, when combined, can create meaningful support. And as they grow, they begin to reduce your dependence on any one source. This is how stability is built, not through a single strong pillar, but through multiple supports, working together. There is also a psychological benefit to this approach. When you know that your income is coming from more than one place, you feel less pressure. You are not as vulnerable to sudden changes. You are not as dependent on a single outcome. And that sense of security allows you to think more clearly and act more confidently. Of course, there will be challenges. Building something new always requires effort. There will be moments of doubt, moments when progress feels slow, moments when you question whether it is worth it. But this is where your understanding of the game becomes important. You are not looking for immediate results. You are building long-term strength. Think of it like planting multiple seeds. Not every seed will grow at the same pace. Some will take longer. Some may not grow at all. But over time, as you continue planting and nurturing, you begin to see results. And eventually you create a system that supports itself. The key is to remain consistent, to keep building even when the progress is not immediately visible, to understand that each small effort is contributing to something larger. Because in the game of money, relying on one source keeps you vulnerable. Building multiple streams gives you strength. And that strength allows you to move forward with confidence, knowing that your financial life is not dependent on a single path, but supported by many. Chapter 8. Eliminate bad debt. Use good debt wisely. Debt is one of the most misunderstood forces in the game of money. For some, it feels like a necessary tool. For others, it feels like a constant burden. And for many, it becomes something they carry without fully understanding how it shapes their financial life. The truth is, debt itself is not the problem. The problem is how it is used. Because when used carelessly, it quietly limits your freedom. But when used wisely, it can become a tool for growth. The first step is to understand the difference between bad debt and good debt. Bad debt takes money out of your life without giving anything back in return. It is awful. tied to things that lose value over time or provide only temporary satisfaction. Good debt, on the other hand, is connected to something that has the potential to grow, generate income, or create long-term value. The difference is not always obvious at first, but over time the results become clear. Think about a common situation. Someone uses debt to finance purchases that do not produce any return. Monthly payments begin to stack up. Interest accumulates, and slowly a portion of their income becomes committed before it even arrives. This reduces flexibility. It creates pressure, and it limits their ability to move forward financially. The debt does not just exist, it controls their actions. Now compare that with someone who approaches debt differently. Instead of using it for short-term gratification, they consider whether debt is connected to something that can grow. They ask, will this help me build, or will this simply cost me over time? That question changes everything, because it shifts the focus from immediate desire to long-term impact. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine two individuals taking on debt. One uses it to purchase items that lose value quickly and require ongoing payments. The other uses it carefully with a clear understanding of how it will be managed and what it will produce. Over time, the first individual finds themselves with increasing financial pressure, while the second uses debt as a control tool rather than a burden. The difference is not the debt itself, it is the intention behind it. Bad debt often grows quietly. It starts small, manageable, almost unnoticed. A purchase here, a payment there, but over time, it begins to accumulate. And as it grows, it starts to take control of your income. A portion of what you earn is no longer yours to direct. It is already committed. This is where the danger lies, not in a single decision, but in the pattern that follows. Eliminating bad debt is not about drastic action. It is about consistent effort. It is about recognizing where your money is being tied up and making a decision to gradually release that pressure. This may require discipline, it may require temporary adjustments, but each step you take toward reducing bad debt increases your freedom. It gives you back control over your income. Now, let's talk about good debt. This is where many people feel uncertain, because while good debt can be useful, it must be approached carefully. It requires understanding, it requires planning, and most importantly, it requires control. Good debt should never feel overwhelming. It should never create pressure that limits your ability to move forward. If it does, then it is no longer serving its purpose. Using debt wisely means thinking beyond the immediate moment. It means considering not just what you are gaining now, but what it will cost you over time. It means ensuring that any debt you take on has a clear purpose and a manageable path. Without that clarity, even well-intentioned decisions can lead to difficulty. Another important idea to understand is that debt amplifies outcomes. When used poorly, it magnifies mistakes. When used wisely, it can accelerate progress. This is why awareness is so important, because once you understand how debt works, you can begin to use it intentionally rather than reactively. There is also a sense of relief that comes from reducing unnecessary debt. As obligations decrease, your income becomes more flexible. You have more room to make decisions, more room to build, more room to grow. And that sense of space allows you to move forward with greater clarity. At the same time, you begin to develop a different relationship with borrowing. You no longer see it as something automatic or casual. You see it as something that requires thought, something that must be aligned with your long-term direction. This shift protects you from impulsive decisions and keeps you focused on what truly matters. Debt, when misunderstood, can quietly hold you back for years, but when understood, it becomes something you can manage, control, and even use to your advantage. The key is not to avoid it entirely, nor to rely on it carelessly. The key is balance, awareness, intention. Because in the game of money, it is not just about how much you earn or save, it is also about what you owe, and how that obligation shapes your future. And when you learn to eliminate what holds you back, and use only what moves you forward, you take another powerful step toward financial control. Chapter 9, think in decades, not in days. The way you think about time shapes the way you handle money, the most. People operate in short cycles, today, this week, this month. They focus on immediate needs, quick results, and fast rewards. And while that may feel practical, it often leads to decisions that limit long-term growth. Because the game of money is not played in days, it is played in decades, and those who understand this begin to move differently. Short-term thinking is powerful, but not in a good way. It pulls your attention toward what is urgent instead of what is important. It encourages quick spending instead of patient building. It makes you chase immediate comfort rather than lasting stability. And over time, these small short-term decisions begin to shape your financial life in ways that are difficult to reverse. Now imagine shifting your perspective. Instead of asking, what do I want right now? You begin to ask, What will this mean in 5 years? In 10 years? That one change in thinking can transform your decisions. Because when you look at money through a long-term lens, your priorities begin to change. Immediate satisfaction becomes less important. Lasting value becomes more important. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine someone who receives extra and immediately spends it on something that brings short-term enjoyment. There is nothing wrong with enjoying your money, but now imagine another person in the same situation who pauses and considers the long-term impact. They choose to use that money in a way that can grow over time. At first, the difference is invisible. Both made a decision, both moved on, but years later, the outcomes are completely different. One decision faded, the other multiplied. This is the power of time. When you align your decisions with long-term thinking, you give your money the opportunity to grow. You allow small actions to compound. You create momentum that builds quietly, often without immediate recognition. And that is where real progress happens, not in sudden changes, but in steady accumulation. One of the reasons people struggle with long-term thinking is because the rewards are not immediate. You do not see dramatic results right away. You do not feel instant satisfaction. And because of that, it can feel like nothing is happening. But this is where patience becomes a key advantage. Because while others are focused on short-term gains, you are building something that will last. Think of it like planting a tree. In the beginning, there's little to see. Growth is slow. Progress feels minimal. But over time, with consistency and care, that tree becomes something strong and stable. The same is true with money. The early stages may feel quiet, but they are essential. They create the foundation for what comes later. Another important point to understand is that short-term thinking often leads to repeated cycles. You earn, you spend, you reset, and you start again. There is no accumulation, no forward movement, just repetition. Long-term thinking breaks that cycle. It introduces direction. It allows each decision to build on the last rather than starting over each time. This does not mean ignoring the present. It means balancing it. You can enjoy today while still planning for tomorrow. You can make choices that support both your current life and your future. The key is awareness. The key is asking yourself whether your decisions are aligned with where you want to be, not just where you are right now. There is also a sense of calm that comes with long-term thinking. You are less affected by temporary changes. You are less reactive to short-term fluctuations because you understand that the game is bigger than a single moment. And that understanding gives you stability. Of course, there will be times when short-term decisions are necessary. Life is not always predictable. But when your overall direction is long-term, those moments do not derail your progress. They become part of the journey, not obstacles to it. The people who build lasting wealth are not those who move the fastest. They are the ones who stay consistent over time. They make decisions that may not look impressive in the moment, but that create powerful results in the long run. They understand that time is not something to fight against, but something to work with. So, begin to stretch your thinking. Look beyond the immediate. Consider the long-term impact of your choices. Because when you start thinking in decades instead of days, you stop chasing quick results and start building something meaningful. And in the game of money, that shift from short-term reactions to long-term vision is one of the most powerful moves you can make. Chapter 10, Make Money Work Harder Than You. There comes a point in the game of money where effort alone is no longer enough. You can work harder, longer, and more consistently, but if your income still depends entirely on your time, your progress will always have a limit. This is where the next shift becomes essential. Instead of asking how you can work more for money, you begin to ask how your money can start working for you. At first, this idea may feel distant or even unrealistic. It sounds like something reserved for those who already have a lot. But in reality, it begins much earlier than most people think. It starts the moment you decide that your money should not remain idle, that it should not simply sit waiting to be spent. It should be given a role, a purpose, a direction. Think about what happens when money is only earned and spent. It moves in a straight line, coming in, going out, and then resetting again. There is no growth, no expansion, no momentum. Now, imagine that instead of letting money follow that pattern, you begin to redirect a portion of it into something that has the potential to grow. At first, the change is small, almost unnoticeable, but over time, that shift begins to create a second layer of income, one that is not directly tied to your daily effort. This is what it means to make money work. It means that your income is no longer limited to what you personally do each day. It begins to expand beyond you. And that expansion, even in small amounts, changes the structure of your financial life. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine someone who earns an income and spends most of it.
saving only when convenient. Their money works only when they work. Now compare that with someone who consistently sets aside a portion and places it into something that grows over time. At first, the results may look similar, but slowly something changes. The second person begins to receive returns, not from additional effort, but from the money itself. The money begins to produce more money. This is where the real shift happens, because once your money starts working, even in small ways, you are no longer starting from zero each month. You're building on what already exists. Your progress becomes layered, and over time, those layers begin to add up. Now, it is important to understand that making money work does not require complexity. It does not require perfect timing or advanced knowledge at the beginning. What it requires is consistency and patience, the willingness to start, to learn, and to allow time to do its work. Many people hesitate because they feel they need to know everything before they begin. They wait for certainty, but in the process, they delay action, and that delay costs them time, the very thing that makes this process effective. The truth is, you do not need to know everything. You need to know enough to start and be willing to improve as you go. Another key idea to remember is that your money should be placed where it has the opportunity to grow. This means moving beyond simply holding it and beginning to think about how it can be used to generate returns. The exact path will vary depending on your situation, your knowledge, and your comfort level, but the principle remains the same. Money should not remain passive when it has the potential to be productive. There is also a mindset shift that happens when you begin to see money this way. You stop viewing it as something to spend and start viewing it as something to deploy. You begin to think in terms of opportunities rather than expenses, and that change in thinking influences every financial decision you make. Of course, there will be moments of uncertainty. There will be times when growth feels slow, when results are not immediately visible. But this is where your understanding of the game becomes important. You are not looking for quick outcomes. You are building a system, and systems take time to develop. Think of it like planting seeds again. Each decision to put your money to work is a seed. Some will grow faster than others. Some will take longer, but over time, as you continue planting and nurturing, you begin to create something that can sustain itself. And eventually, that system begins to support you in ways that your effort alone never could. The goal is not to stop working. The goal is to reduce how much your income depends entirely on your work, to create a balance where your effort and your money are both contributing to your growth. Because in the game of money, working hard is important, but it is only the beginning. Real progress comes when your money begins to work alongside you. And once that happens, you are no longer moving forward alone. Chapter 11. Take smart risks to move forward. Progress in the game of money always involves risk. Not reckless risk, not blind decisions, but calculated, thoughtful movement into the unknown. Yet for many people, the word risk carries a sense of fear. It feels dangerous, unstable, something to be avoided. And because of that fear, they choose safety. They stay where things feel predictable. But over time, that same safety becomes a quiet limitation. The truth is, avoiding risk entirely is not safe. It only feels safe in the moment. Because when you avoid all risk, you also avoid growth. You avoid opportunity. You avoid change. And while nothing may seem to go wrong immediately, nothing moves forward either. You remain in the same place, repeating the same patterns, hoping for a different result. Now, this does not mean you should take risks without thinking. There is a difference between calculated risk and careless action. Calculated risk involves awareness. It involves understanding what you are doing, what the possible outcomes are, and what you are willing to accept. It is not about certainty. It is about preparation. Think about someone who never steps beyond what they already know. They continue doing the same things, making the same choices, staying within familiar boundaries. Over time, they become comfortable, but that comfort comes at a cost. Because while they remain stable, others who are willing to take thoughtful risks begin to move ahead. They explore new opportunities. They learn new skills. They expand their possibilities. And slowly, the gap begins to grow. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine two individuals with similar starting points. One avoids any decision that feels uncertain. The other approaches uncertainty with curiosity and preparation. They research. They learn. And they take small, calculated steps forward. At first, the difference is not obvious. But over time, the second individual gains experience, confidence, and new opportunities. The first remains in the same place, not because they lack ability, but because they avoided the discomfort of risk. And this is where understanding becomes important. Risk is not something to fear blindly. It is something to manage. It is something to approach with clarity. The goal is not to eliminate risk. That is impossible. The goal is to reduce unnecessary risk and take purposeful risk. One way to think about this is by asking better questions. Instead of asking, what if this goes wrong? Begin to ask, what can I learn from this? Or what is the worst case outcome and can I handle it? These questions shift your perspective. They move you from fear to understanding. And when you understand the potential outcomes, you can make more confident decisions. Another important idea is that risk often feels larger before you take action. It appears uncertain, unclear, even intimidating. But once you take that first step, it becomes more manageable. You gain information. You gain experience. And what once felt overwhelming becomes something you can handle. There is also a hidden benefit to taking smart risks, growth. Every time you step into something new, you expand your understanding. You learn what works and what is not. You develop skills that cannot be gained by staying still. And over time, that growth becomes one of your greatest advantages. Of course, not every risk will lead to immediate success. There will be setbacks. There will be mistakes. But these are not failures in the way most people think. They are part of the process. They provide feedback. They show you what to adjust, what to improve, what to avoid next time. And with each experience, you become better equipped to make smarter decisions. It is also important to start at a level that feels manageable. You do not need to take large risks to begin. Small, calculated steps are often more effective. They allow you to learn without overwhelming yourself. They build confidence gradually. And as your understanding grows, you can take on greater challenges. Think of it as building a muscle. You do not start with the heaviest weight. You start with what you can handle, and you increase over time. The same principle applies to risks. Start where you are, learn, adjust, grow. Another key point is that doing nothing is also a risk. It is a slower, less visible risk, but it is real. Because while you remain in place, time continues to move. Opportunities pass. Circumstances change. And without action, you may find yourself falling behind without even realizing it. So the question is not whether you will face risk. The question is how you will respond to it. Will you avoid it and stay where you are? Or will you approach it with awareness and use it as a tool for growth? Because in the game of money, progress requires movement. And movement requires a willingness to step into uncertainty, not blindly, not carelessly, but with intention. Take smart risks. Learn from them. Build on them. And over time, what once felt uncertain will become your path forward. Chapter 12. Upgrade your environment. Upgrade your income. Your financial life is not shaped by your decisions alone. It is also shaped by the environment you live in, the people you interact with, the conversations you hear, the standards you accept as normal. And often this influence is so subtle that you don't even notice it. You simply adapt. You think the way others think. You act the way others act. And over time, those patterns become your reality. This is why environment matters more than most people realize. Because your environment sets the tone for what feels possible. If you are surrounded by people who constantly struggle with money, who avoid financial responsibility, or who believe that growth is out of reach, that mindset begins to affect you. Not because you choose it consciously, but because it becomes familiar. And what feels familiar often feels right, even when it is limiting. Now imagine a different environment. One where people talk about growth, where they take responsibility for their financial decisions, where they look for opportunities instead of excuses. In that kind of environment, your thinking begins to shift. You start to see new possibilities. You begin to question old habits, and slowly your actions begin to change. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine two individuals with similar abilities and starting points. One is surrounded by people who spend without thinking, who avoid planning, and who dismiss the idea of long-term growth. The other is surrounded by people who are intentional, who discuss ideas, who focus on improvement. Over time, their paths begin to separate, not because of talent, but because of influence. One remains in the same pattern, the other evolves. This is not about judging others or distancing yourself from people unnecessarily. It is about awareness. It is about recognizing that influence exists, whether you acknowledge it or not. And once you become aware of that influence, you can begin to shape it. Upgrading your environment does not always mean making dramatic changes. It can start with small intentional steps. It can be choosing what you listen to, what you read, what conversations you engage in. It can be seeking out people who challenge you, who inspire you, who think differently. These small changes may not feel significant at first, but over time, they begin to reshape your perspective. Another important point to understand is that your environment affects your standards. What you consider normal is often based on what you see around you. If financial struggle is normal, you may accept it, without question.
If growth and improvement are normal, you begin to expect more from yourself, and those expectations influence your actions. Think about how this applies to your daily life, the habits you maintain, the decisions you make, the goals you set. They are all influenced by your surroundings. When you upgrade your environment, even slightly, you raise your standards. You begin to expect better outcomes, and that expectation leads to better choices. There is also a powerful effect that comes from being around people who are moving forward. Their energy, their mindset, their approach to challenges, it all becomes visible. You see how they think, how they act, how they respond to setbacks, and that exposure gives you a reference point. It shows you what is possible. Of course, this does not mean you will immediately change everything. Growth takes time, but when your environment supports that growth, the process becomes easier. You are not constantly working against negative influence, instead you are being supported by positive direction. It is also important to become aware of your own role in your environment, because while others influence you, you also influence yourself through your choices. The content you consume, the thoughts you repeat, the habits you reinforce, all of these create an internal environment. And just like your external surroundings, this internal environment shapes your actions. So upgrading your environment is not just about who you are around, it's also about what you allow into your mind. It is about being intentional with your focus, because what you focus on grows. And when your focus is aligned with growth, your results begin to follow. There may be moments when change feels uncomfortable, when stepping into a new environment feels unfamiliar, but that discomfort is often a sign that you are moving beyond your previous limits. It is part of the process, and with time, what once felt unfamiliar becomes your new normal. Because in the game of money, your environment is not just a background, it is a force. It shapes your thinking, your decisions, and ultimately your results. And when you begin to upgrade that environment, even in small ways, you begin to upgrade your financial life as well. The change may not happen overnight, but it will happen. And once it does, you will see that growth was not just about what you did, it was also about where you placed yourself while doing it. Chapter 13, Learn What School Never Taught You. There is a gap in most people's education that becomes very clear once they step into the real world. You are taught how to read, how to write, how to solve problems, how to follow instructions, but rarely are you taught how money actually works. You learn how to earn, but not how to build. You learn how to pass tests, but not how to make financial decisions that shape your future. And because of that, many people spend years figuring out what could have been understood much earlier. This is not a criticism of education. It serves an important purpose. But when it comes to money, much of what truly matters is learned outside the classroom. It is learned through experience, through observation, through intentional effort. And those who take the time to learn these lessons gain a clear advantage, not because they are more talented, but because they understand the game more deeply. Think about how most people approach money. They rely on what they have been told or what they have seen others do. They follow patterns without questioning them. They make decisions based on assumptions rather than understanding. And while this may feel normal, it often leads to confusion because when something goes wrong, they do not know why. And when something goes right, they cannot repeat it consistently. Now, imagine approaching money differently. Instead of relying on assumptions, you begin to learn. You begin to ask questions. You begin to understand the principles behind your decisions. What is an asset? What is a liability? How does money grow? What influences financial outcomes over time? These are not complicated questions, but they are powerful. Because once you begin to understand the answers, you start to see patterns that were previously invisible. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine two individuals with similar incomes. One follows common habits without questioning them. The other takes time to learn, reading, observing, and applying what they discover. At first, there is little difference, but over time, the second individual begins to make better decisions. They avoid common mistakes. They recognize opportunities earlier. And slowly, their financial position improves, not because they are working harder, but because they are thinking more clearly. This is the value of knowledge. It does not replace action, but it guides it. It helps you move in the right direction instead of guessing. It reduces unnecessary mistakes, and it gives you confidence because you understand what you are doing and why. Another important point to understand is that learning about money is not a one-time effort. It is an ongoing process. The world changes, opportunities evolve, and your own situation grows. What you know today is a starting point, not a final answer. And those who continue to learn remain adaptable. They adjust. They improve. They stay aligned with the game as it changes. This does not mean you need to spend hours studying complex ideas. It means being intentional. It means choosing to learn what matters. Even small amounts of knowledge, applied consistently, can make a significant difference. A single insight can change how you see money.
a new understanding can change how you make decisions. There is also something important about learning through experience. Not everything can be understood from theory alone. Some lessons come from action, from trying, adjusting, and improving. And while mistakes are part of that process, they are also valuable, because each mistake, when understood, becomes a lesson that moves you forward. At the same time, you can learn from others. You can observe what works and what does not. You can listen to those who have already walked the path, not to copy them exactly, but to understand the principles behind their success. Because, while situations may differ, the underlying ideas often remain the same. One of the most powerful shifts happens when you stop seeing money as something mysterious and start seeing it as something understandable. When you realize that financial success is not random, but based on patterns and decisions, and once you understand those patterns, you can begin to apply them in your own life. This chapter is not about becoming an expert overnight. It is about becoming aware. It is about recognizing that what you have learned so far may not be enough, and that you have the ability to learn more. Because in the game of money, knowledge is not just helpful, it is essential. The more you understand, the more control you have. The more you learn, the better your decisions become. And over time, that knowledge compounds, just like money does. Because what school did not teach you, you can still learn. And once you do, you begin to see the game with new clarity and play it with new Chapter 14. Build daily discipline that compounds over time. There is a quiet force behind every lasting financial success, and it is not talent, luck, or even opportunity. It is discipline. Not the kind that appears once in a while, not the kind that depends on motivation, but the kind that shows up every day in small, consistent actions. Because in the game of money, what you do occasionally has very little impact. What you do daily shapes everything. Discipline is often misunderstood. It is seen as restriction, as something rigid or uncomfortable. But in reality, discipline is what creates freedom. It is what allows you to make decisions with clarity instead of impulse. It is what keeps you aligned with your long-term goals, even when short-term distractions appear. And over time, it becomes less about effort and more about identity, something you simply do without questioning. Think about how habits are formed. A single action does not define you, but repeated actions do. When you consistently make intentional financial decisions, no matter how small, they begin to build a pattern, and that pattern becomes your default. You no longer need to force yourself to act wisely, it becomes natural. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine someone who decides to review their finances regularly, even if it is just for a few minutes. At first, it may feel unnecessary. It may even feel repetitive, but over time, that simple habit creates awareness. It keeps them connected to their financial situation. It prevents small issues from becoming larger problems, and gradually, it builds confidence. Now compare that with someone who only pays attention to their finances when something goes wrong. Their approach is reactive. They respond to problems instead of preventing them, and because of that, they often feel uncertain and unprepared. The difference between these two approaches is not intelligence or effort. It is consistency. This is where discipline becomes powerful. It turns small actions into meaningful results. It allows progress to build quietly without constant effort. And most importantly, it removes the need for motivation, because motivation comes and goes. It is influenced by how you feel, by your energy, by your circumstances. Discipline, on the other hand, remains steady. It does not depend on how you feel. It depends on what you have decided. Another important point to understand is that discipline protects you from your own impulses. There will always be moments of temptation, opportunities to spend without thinking, to delay action, to ignore what you know is important. In those moments, discipline acts as a guide. It reminds you of your direction. It helps you stay aligned with your goals, even when it would be easier to drift. This does not mean you will always be perfect. There will be days when you make mistakes, when you fall off track, when you choose convenience over intention. That is part of the process. Discipline is not about never making mistakes. It is about returning to your habits quickly. It is about not allowing one decision to become a pattern. Think of discipline as something that compounds, just like money. Each consistent action adds to the last. Each small decision builds on the previous one, and over time, the results begin to grow. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily. And that steady growth is what creates lasting change. There is also a sense of stability that comes with discipline. When your actions are consistent, your results become more predictable. You are not constantly reacting to change. You are guiding it. And that sense of control reduces stress. It allows you to focus on growth instead of recovery. Another key idea is that discipline simplifies your life. When you have clear habits, You do not need to make as many decisions. You do not need to question every action. You already know what to do. And that clarity frees up your energy for more important choices. At first, building discipline may feel challenging. It requires awareness. It requires effort. But over time, it becomes easier. What once felt like effort becomes routine. And once it becomes routine, it no longer feels like discipline. It feels like who you are. This is where the real transformation happens, because when discipline becomes part of your identity, your actions align naturally with your goals. You do not need to push yourself constantly. You move forward with consistency. In the game of money, there are many strategies, many ideas, many opportunities. But without discipline, none of them can be sustained. Discipline is what turns knowledge into action. It is what turns intention into results. So, focus on the daily actions. Keep them simple. Keep them consistent. Do not underestimate their power, because over time, those small disciplined actions will build something much larger than you expect. And when they do, you will realize that success was never about doing everything at once. It was about doing the right things again and again until they became part of you. Chapter 15. Design your financial life with intention. At some point, everything you've learned begins to come together. The awareness, the habits, the decisions, the discipline, they are no longer separate ideas. They form a direction, and that direction leads to one final question. Are you living your financial life by design or by default? Most people live by default without realizing it. They follow patterns they never chose. They earn, spend, adjust, and repeat. Their financial life is shaped by circumstances, by habits picked up over time, by decisions made without much thought. And because it happens gradually, it feels normal. But normal does not always mean intentional. Designing your financial life means stepping out of that pattern. It means choosing your direction instead of drifting into it. It means deciding what matters to you, what kind of life you want to build, and how money will support that vision. Because money, at its core, is not the goal. It is a tool. And like any tool, its value depends on how you use it. Think about this for a moment. If you do not decide where your money should go, it will be directed elsewhere, by habits, by impulses, by external influences. But when you take the time to define your priorities, everything begins to align. Your decisions become clearer. Your actions become more focused. And your progress becomes more intentional. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine two individuals earning similar incomes. One moves through life without a clear plan. They respond to situations as they arise, making decisions based on immediate needs or desires. The other takes time to think about what they want their financial life to look like. They define their goals, their priorities, their direction. Over time, their paths begin to separate. Not because one works harder, but because one is intentional. Design does not require perfection. It does not require that everything be figured out from the beginning. It simply requires clarity, a sense of direction, an understanding of what you are working toward. And once you have that, you can begin to align your actions with your vision. This is where all the previous chapters connect. You have learned to take control of your money. You have learned to prioritize yourself, to build assets, to think long-term, to stay disciplined. Now, you bring all of that together into a system that fits your life. Not someone else's version of success. Not a standard defined by others, your own. Because financial success is not the same for everyone. For some, it means freedom from stress. For others, it means the ability to create, to explore, to provide, to grow. The specifics may differ, but the principle remains the same. Your financial life should support your life, not control it. Designing your financial life also means being intentional with your choices. It means asking, does this align with where I want to go? It means recognizing when something is taking you off track and making adjustments. It means staying aware, even as things improve. There will be moments when it is tempting to drift, when things feel comfortable, when progress is steady, when it seems easier to stop paying attention. But this is where intention matters most, because without it, even progress can become unstable. With it, you maintain direction. Another important idea is flexibility. Designing your financial life does not mean locking yourself into a rigid plan. Life changes. Circumstances evolve. And your approach should be able to adapt. The key is not to avoid change, but to remain intentional within it. To adjust your path without losing your direction. As you move forward, you may begin to notice something. Decisions become easier. Not because there are fewer options, but because you know what matters.
You are no longer reacting to everything. You are choosing based on purpose. And that clarity brings confidence. There is also a sense of ownership that comes with design. You are no longer following a path that was created for you. You are creating your own. And that shift changes how you see yourself. You are not just someone earning money. You are someone building a life. This is where the game changes. Because once you begin to design your financial life, you are no longer playing blindly. You are playing with intention. You are making moves that align with your goals. You are building something that reflects your values. And over time, that design becomes your reality. Not through sudden change, not through luck, but through consistent, intentional action. Because in the end, the goal is not just to understand money. It is to use it in a way that supports the life you want to live. And when you reach that point, when your money works in alignment with your purpose, you are no longer just playing the game. You are directing it. Conclusion. The game of money was never hidden. It was simply never explained in a way that made it clear. You are always playing. From the moment you earned your first income to every decision you made after that. The difference now is awareness. You no longer move through this game blindly. You see the patterns. You understand the rules. And most importantly, you recognize that your financial life is not something that happens to you. It is something you shape. Throughout this journey, you have seen how small shifts create powerful outcomes. You learn that money is not about effort alone, but about direction. That working harder is not enough without thinking differently. That control, discipline, and consistency matter more than occasional intensity. And that time, when used wisely, becomes one of your greatest advantages. You began by waking up to the game, understanding that awareness is the first step. Then you broke away from the idea of trading time for income as your only path. You took control of your money instead of letting it slip through unnoticed. You learned to pay yourself first, to prioritize your future before everything else. You saw the difference between assets and liabilities and how each decision either builds or delays your progress. You discovered the importance of starting small, trusting time to do its work. You understood why relying on a single source of income limits your potential and how building multiple streams creates strength. You faced the reality of debt, learning to eliminate what holds you back and use only what moves you forward. You shifted your thinking from short-term reactions to long-term vision. You saw how money can work for you, not just through effort, but through intention. You learned that risk is not something to fear, but something to manage wisely. You recognized how your environment shapes your thinking and how upgrading it can elevate your results. You filled the gaps in what you were never taught, building knowledge that gives you clarity and control. You developed discipline, the quiet force that turns small actions into lasting change. And finally, you learn to design your financial life with intention, aligning your money with your purpose. Now everything comes down to one simple truth: knowing is not enough. The rules only matter if you use them. The understanding you have gained only creates value when it is applied, because the game does not reward awareness alone. It rewards action repeated over time. You do not need to change everything at once. You do not need a perfect plan. What you need is a starting point, a decision, a commitment to move differently from this moment forward. Even small actions taken consistently will begin to shift your direction, and once your direction changes, your results will follow. There will be moments of doubt, moments when progress feels slow, moments when old habits try to pull you back, but this is part of the process. Growth is not always visible. Change is not always immediate. What matters is that you continue, that you stay aware, that you remain intentional, because over time, something powerful happens. The habits you build become automatic. The decisions you once struggled with become natural. The effort you once had to force becomes part of who you are, and when that happens, you are no longer trying to play the game better. You are playing it differently. This is not about becoming perfect with money. It is about becoming intentional with it. It is about understanding that every decision matters, every action builds, and every step moves you closer to the life you are creating. The game has not changed. The rules have always been there, but now you see them. Now you understand them, and now you have the ability to use them. So from this moment forward, play with awareness, play with purpose, play with patience, because the game is already in motion, and this time, you know exactly how to play.